everybody, and welcome into another edition of the Roy's Boys podcast. Josh and Anthony here as always, but today we got a special guest. R.L. Bynum of the Triangle Sports Network is joining us. He was at the game last night, and R.L. is going to ask you, what did you think of the game and your thoughts from the 88-72 win by the Tar Heels over Duke?
Well, I mean, the two numbers that are staggering is that Carolina has its worst three-point shooting of the season at 2 of 20, and you figure they don't have a shot at winning with those numbers. Only they do if they outscore Duke inside 62-28. Those two numbers are staggering, and it's hard to understand how that happens. Obviously, Zion Williamson not being there probably helped quite a bit as far as going inside. And also, Luke May, when he's playing State or Duke, seems to have the eye of the tiger. He was just doing everything right, rebounding, scoring, and they didn't have any answers for him.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And, one of the things that I really found interesting, I mean, Luke May is a guy that really has received some criticism from the fan base, some criticism from, I think, some of the media guys, especially earlier this season. And he stepped up and had 30 points and 15 rebounds. When you look at him, especially in these rivalry games, it just seems like he has the ability to step up in these big moments. And is that kind of what you saw from him last night?
It really was. And he's motivated. He talked a little bit last night about all the doubters and proving them wrong. He actually said that a lot of people say he doesn't show up for big games, and I don't know who he's hearing saying that, but he actually has done that, and it motivates him, I'm sure, and I'm sure the Crazies had a few words for him that might have inspired him as well, although I didn't hear any personally, but they tend to be all over the Carolina players, but he talked about that a good bit the post game last night. That a lot of people said he couldn't be an impact player and that he couldn't play here and he couldn't start here. And a couple of seasons after he started in place of Isaiah Hicks and just did okay, he really showed that he can be that kind of player in a big game in the biggest rivalry in sports probably.
Yeah, he definitely showed up last night. Two players that didn't show up last night that I think we all were wanting to have our eyes on were Kobe White and Trey Jones. Can you just speak about how both the point guards from Duke and Carolina struggled to get in the flow of the game? Because I thought whichever point guard outplayed the other, that team was going to win, and that certainly wasn't the case last night.
Right. Kobe did have his struggles. It's a season-high 6 turnovers, and maybe just got a little bit too fast for him. But the good thing for Carolina is that Seventh Woods came in and had some solid minutes. I don't know if that game goes quite that way if Seventh doesn't come in with those good minutes. And you remember the end of the first half when the Cam missed the layup and then Seventh comes back with a steal and everything. I think that the defense that Trey Jones put on Kobe is defense that he probably hasn't seen this season, and he'll learn from that. And I would bet that you get better play from him in the next game. As far as Trey Jones, 1 of 11 from the floor, that's stunning. 3 turnovers. So both of them did not come up with the sort of performances that you would have expected in this game, that's for sure. Of course, not having Zion Williamson to pass to probably had an effect on Trey Jones as well.
One of the other areas that I thought was, a very interesting turning point in the game, I thought Carolina did a great job, especially early in that first half of turning Duke over. You look at the assist-to-turnover ratio in this game, and Carolina with a 20-15 assist-to-turnover ratio, as opposed to Duke's 9-20. That really seemed to be one of the areas, and everybody's talked about how this defense has struggled throughout the year, even though the efficiency numbers would stay different. When you were there last night, did it just seem like they were more active defensively, and do you think maybe part of that was because of the rivalry, or what do you think maybe had an impact with that?
I think part of that was the rivalry, but I think the defense has improved in recent games. If you'll remember, or 8 or 9 games ago, there were a couple where there was no defensive player of the year, defensive player of the game award given because none of those players deserved it. I think they're all playing better defense. Garrison has really been bringing it on defense, and everybody else has. And considering the athleticism of guys like Reddish and Barrett, you really have to credit Carolina with the job they did last night, because a lot of teams can't do that. They did. Those two did get their points, but they didn't get any points basically from anybody else.
Yeah, that's very true. One thing I want to ask you, Carolina is predominantly older. They had our 3 seniors outplayed their freshmen. I've always thought that's mattered, especially since Duke has gone to the one and done player. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that experience matters in this rivalry, or if the talent shows up, the talent could take down our experience?
Well, it just depends. There were times when you looked on the basis of the Duke players, particularly early in the second half, I think they were a little shell-shocked. They hadn't been through this before. They had the Gonzaga game for sure, but they really hadn't been in this kind of situation. And obviously, Carolina's seniors had been through it before. They've experienced it. They've learned from it, and it's got to be an advantage in this kind of situation. Obviously, Duke had an amazing comeback last week, but they just couldn't come up with it today and last night. And if you're an experienced team, that could make a difference. And obviously, you look at the guys who scored the most points. There was May and Johnson, so that senior leadership can take you a long way, even if you might not be as athletic as the young guys are.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, when we talked about depth before the game, and, I think last night, I was kind of shocked how deep Duke actually was and how deep they actually went into their bench. Part of that was because they really didn't have a choice because Zion left the game, but when you look at the depth for Carolina, you talked about Seven Woods, and his impact was huge last night. But also Brandon Robinson and Nazir Little wasn't as effective as we've seen him in some of the other games this year. But I still felt like he came in and gave Carolina some good minutes and really played well defensively. So when you look at the depth of this Carolina team, is that something that could factor in and actually help them going on, throughout the rest of the season, and maybe when we circle back around on March 9th to play the Blue Devils again?
Right, and I mentioned 7th earlier, but Brandon Robinson, he didn't hit any shots last night, but his ability to hit the three and the respect that he gets from opponents when they're scouting them, you could tell. There were a couple of assists that Brandon made last night that maybe he would not have been able to make if he didn't have their respect to know that he can make the three-pointer. And Brandon really has done a good job with his all-around game. And he had a steal as well. But you notice last night that really Carolina only went 8 deep. I mean, Brandon Huffman was in there for a minute, but they weren't that deep. And it seems like Coach Williams is doing what he often does down the stretch and shortening his bench. Andrew Platek didn't even get in last night, so he's got the depth, but he's not using it right now. Obviously, when Leaky Black comes back, hopefully soon, he will obviously be used a lot, but who knows how soon that's going to be.
With the win last night, we now got 3 teams all at 11-2 in the ACC with Duke, Carolina, and Virginia, and Duke has the more harder path to finish, where Carolina outside of is a little bit easier. How do you see the ACC finishing up? Do you think the game on March 9th will determine the ACC regular season championship, something that hasn't been the case since 2012?
Depends on what Virginia does. Obviously, Virginia's got the tiebreaker against Carolina. Somebody else is going to have to beat Virginia. If somebody else does, then it probably will come down to that game. but it's hard to say. It could very well be that, or it could finish tied, and it just be a battle for seed in the ACC tournament.
All right, so last question, and then we'll get you out of here on this. I mean, I guess we got to ask you about the storyline, but when you look back on this game, some people are going to say there is going to be an asterisk next to it because Zion left early in the game. I mean, is this a game that you're actually that most people will probably say the only reason that Carolina won was because Zion was out? Or is this a game that, I think, both me and Josh believe, and probably, a decent amount of people around the ACC believe Carolina won, because they are a very good basketball team?
Well, some people will say it's the only reason, but that's not accurate. And I think Carolina showed last night that it has multiple ways to beat people. And anybody who's watched this team most of the season knows that they're not going to go 2 of 20 from three-point range most nights. So you take the way that they played in other areas of the game and then add in their normal proficiency from the perimeter. Last night could have been a blowout, and I don't know how much. Obviously, Zion would have made a difference, but for what this has shown is that Carolina is a team that can make a Final Four run. And whether Zion plays last night or not, it will be interesting if Williamson is back for the regular season finale to see how that plays out there.
All righty, yeah, I think that's going to do it. So, RL, hey, thanks for coming on with us, man. Hey, tell the people where they can follow you on social media so they can make sure they're following one of the best when it comes to covering Carolina.
Well, I appreciate it. RL_Bynum. On social media, and then my Tar Heels coverage is on Triangle Sports Network, and I also have a twice-a-month sports media column on Sports Channel 8.
Hey, RL, thank you so much, man, and get some rest. I know it was a late night for you last night, so we'll talk to you down the line, and keep doing what you're doing, man. You do such a great job covering the Tar Heels for the Triangle Sports Network.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right, thanks, man. I do want to thank RL for joining us and bringing some great insight to the rivalry. Like Anthony said, he is one of the better guys we have covering the ACC and Carolina in general. I use a lot of his stuff that he tweets in the previews and in the breakdown for the podcast. So glad to have him on. So we'll go ahead and get to our thoughts on this game. And I really thought the way that the game was going to go was completely opposite the way it played out. I thought it was going to be up and down. I thought it was going to be high scoring. I thought both teams were going to shoot it really well, and that just simply wasn't the case. I mean, if you'd have told me we shot 10% from three and we turned it over 15 times, I'd have told you we'd have gotten beat. But you make up because we shot over 60% from inside the 3-point line, and we dominated the glass. And just the way we were in Duke's shooting motion, and we were closing out on shots, made it hard for Duke. So really maybe our best defensive effort we've seen all year. I get that Zion wasn't there, but I think our guys were locked in from the tip. R.J. Barrett had his way, but look, I've said all along, I think he's the better NBA prospect. He showed that last night, but when Luke May and Cam Johnson are that dialed in, we're as tough to beat as anybody in college basketball.
I mean, first of all, on the defensive effort, I really thought that when you looked at Carolina, coming into this game, I think some people, they saw that we had struggled with ball screens, and I think that was one of the things that, we did a really great job of last night, especially Garrison Brooks, who, was matched up a few times, actually, with Trey Jones, and did a great job keeping him from being able to drive to the basket. And that's the one thing that I thought they did so great that early in the season they just didn't do, which was prevent teams from being able to drive the ball inside. We saw it early in conference play against Pittsburgh. We've even seen it a couple of times against Miami. So I think, they did the thing they had to do once Zion left the floor. Zion was in there. Look, you knew that he was going to get post touches, and they were probably going to be some baskets inside. That's just how it's going to work. But with him off the floor, you still thought, okay, they're going to try to drive the lane a little bit, which they did, but Carolina did a great job of denying that and forcing them to take the outside shot that just wasn't going down. I mean, they forced the most three-point attempts from them since they lost to Syracuse. 39 three-point attempts from last night. They were 8 of 39, and that's the most three-point attempts that they've taken since the loss to Syracuse, like we mentioned, when they shot 43. So, I think that's one of the keys with this Duke team, and that's something that I think we've heard about coming in, and we heard about, especially after that Syracuse game, was, look, if you can force them into having to take the outside shots, they do have some guys that can knock them down. And we saw there were some moments where R.J. Barrett was able to knock down, 2 in a row, or I think there was even one stretch where he knocked down 3 consecutive threes. But other than that, the rest of the team was not able to be that efficient from deep. So I think that's one of the game plans that, we'll probably see once again in the second matchup. And I think we'll talk about that more, once we get back around to the second time, when we play them back when we play them in March. The other thing, I said it with RL, look, you forced 20 turnovers. That just shows how active you were on the defensive end. And, it was, Jones Angel mentioned this on the post game last night. It was just a weird game from the perspective of there were a lot of loose balls where, there'd be a turnover by us, and then we turn the ball right back over to, get it back in our possession. It was just a very strange game like that where, there was a lot of up and down play, and I think both teams were, at times a little loose with the basketball. But Carolina, I think, took advantage of that. I think Duke found out that, look, it's not going to be the easiest thing. Yeah, you've been mowing through some of these other teams in the ACC, but this is different. This is Duke Carolina. So I think Carolina really stepped up defensively, like you said. And then when you talk about the offensive end, look, you shoot 2 of 20 from 3. Yeah, if you told me 2 of 20 from 3, even with Zion out, I would have told you we'd probably get beat by 10 or more points. But you mentioned it inside the arc. They shot 36 of 55.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. That's about as good as you can hope for. The 62 points in the paint was the most for Carolina this season. The previous high was 54, and that came against Tennessee Tech. So, you see the difference there.
Yeah.
If you want to compare those two opponents, you go ahead. There's not really a comparison there at all. Carolina just did a fantastic job, and the best thing that I like from Carolina, and we saw at times they were trying to look for the outside shot, and we were yelling at them to get the ball back inside. When they started going inside and realized that, hey, we have something going on here, and they actually did it early in the game too, which is something that I give them a lot of credit for, because early in games they've really settled for a lot of jump shots. They saw, look, we're going inside and it's working. We're going to keep putting the ball inside. And part of that's got to be credited to Roy Williams, but you also got to credit the guys on the floor. They overall, I thought, a fantastic game from these guys. People said this wasn't the best game that we've seen Carolina play all year. But guess what? How many times is the best game that you see Carolina play every year against Duke? It's just very rare because, look, Duke is a tough opponent. It's just that plain and simple.
Yeah, it was just one of those games, like Jones said, it wasn't the normal Duke Carolina game, because normally when we play, it's college basketball at a high level, because there's so much talent and the coaching is so great. But last night it didn't work out that way. Still a fun, entertaining game, especially for us Carolina fans. But one thing, and I wrote this down, we talked about in the preview, this rivalry there's always some unsung hero that plays a big role in the game. And last night, that was Seventh Woods. You can't understate what he did for us. He settled us down at times when the Duke pressure picked up and Kobe was having problems handling the ball and running the offense. And Seventh has been very inconsistent in ACC play, but he picked a very good time to be good. Seventh Woods last night had a couple drives to the basket where he just got by his defender for layups, and I think if we can get more of that kind of play from Seventh Woods, it's only going to make this team tougher and to beat and, of course, more deeper as we go into March.
Yeah, I think we mentioned it a little bit in the preview that we thought Seventh Woods would play a little bit of a role, mainly because it was Kobe White's first time playing in this rivalry. And I think that showed at times, and you mentioned it, especially when they started picking up the full court pressure. I think he had a little bit of trouble handling it, and, there was a time where both him and Seventh Woods were in the game. And I thought that, you were calling for it actually while we were sitting there at the bar that we were watching the game at, and, it was a great call. I think when they went to that, they were effective, and I thought, Seventh Woods, as a veteran guy, knew exactly what you have to do when you face full court pressure, and that's keep the basketball moving. And he did a great job with that. I totally agree. There was a time in both halves where he came in and was able to help Kobe, settle down by allowing him to sit on the bench for a minute and really just talk to the coaching staff and say, look, this is what I'm seeing out there, and allow the coaching staff to coach him up. We haven't seen that a lot this year because, frankly, we haven't needed it. I think Duke, we know Trey Jones is a fantastic defender, and I think that, Kobe was a little bit thrown off by what he was seeing from him because that's the best defender he's faced and probably will face all season. But having a veteran guy like Seventh Woods who, okay, people will say, well, Seventh Woods isn't what we expected he would be with all the hype that we were hearing coming out of high school. I think he's filling a role that we need him to fill, which is that veteran presence behind the young point guard. So I'm with you. I think he had a fantastic performance last night. Again, 5 points. That's not going to blow anyone out of the water, and that's why I think a lot of people, when they look back on this box score, will probably forget, because when you look back on a box score, you're always looking for points. But really, if you go back and watch this game, he had such a huge impact, and you wonder if that's how that's going to continue going forward. We'll see. Once again, I think it's going to be huge. Come March 9th, whenever we play them in the Smith Center.
Yeah. All right, a couple more things before we get to our last guest on the podcast. Last night was the 14th time Carolina's won a game against the nation's number one ranked team. That's the most in the history of college basketball. 8 of those wins have come against Duke. And, of course, so with that win, we moved to 7-0 on the road in ACC play, which is the second best start since we started 8-0, or we went 8-0 on the road way back in 2008. That team, of course, made the Final Four. And with last night's win against the number one ranked team, that was Roy Williams' 8th all-time, breaking a tie with Gary Lynch. Now he owns that. He's got the most wins against number one ranked teams in the history of the sport. Just another reason to put on this pedestal why this guy belongs on your Mount Rushmore. And still, with 3 national championships and 9 Final Fours, is still, in my opinion, an underrated coach when you talk about everyone else in college basketball, because everyone wants to go to K, Self, Jay Wright, Izzo. But this guy's got 3 national championships, which only 6 coaches have, and he's always good against the best teams in the country. So an overall an impressive performance. They got to turn around, and they have a big game Saturday at home against Florida State, who's won 8 in a row, and they're playing as good as anybody in the conference. And we'll have a separate preview for that game coming up later today. But another reason why this rivalry delivers, and some more stats to prove why Carolina probably has the most complete program in the country, because the metrics show up that, when they play the best teams, they beat them more often than anybody else, and hopefully we continue to do that. All right, so, Ashton, I just want to get your thoughts on last night's 88-72 win over Duke. Give it to me, buddy.
I thought it was great.
Did you?
Yeah, Cameron Johnson and Luke May, those guys combined to score 56 points, and I love the way those two played.
Yeah, they were both very impressive. I want to ask you, what do you think if I'd have told you Carolina shot 10% from three-point land, do you think Carolina would have won?
No.
Yeah, you're probably right. So, is there any other analysts you want to have to the game? I don't know if you have any stats in front of you, because I know I kind of threw it on you in the last second.
I actually do.
All right.
Well, on the Duke side, RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish, those guys combined for 60 points. And those guys got hot there early and late, and I mean, I'm a little surprised Mike Krzyzewski didn't substitute R.J. Barrett and Trey Jones, because those two guys played 40 minutes.
Did they really? I didn't even know that. Well, that's because they don't have any depth, Ashton, because Kay doesn't like to recruit players like Roy Williams. I do want to ask you, do you think if Zion would have played, Carolina would have still won? Be honest.
It might have been close, but I don't think so.
So you think Carolina would have lost, or you think we still would have won if Zion played?
I think it would have been really close, but I think the Blue Devils would have won by about somewhere in between 1 to 5 points.
Oh,
Might even have gone into overtime.
Well, but at least you're honest. I'm of the opinion that I want him to play the March 9th game. What do you think? You think he'll be back healthy, ready to go when we play again in 2.5 weeks?
I wouldn't be surprised to see him healthy for the next couple of games.
No, okay. Anthony, you have anything you want to ask Ashton?
Yeah, I know you watched last night, and Kobe White struggled, but do you think Kobe will get it back on track when we play Florida State?
Well, he did end up with 3 assists and 9 points, so it wasn't too much of a struggle, but for him this and I guess you can say it was a struggle, but yes, he should be back on board.
I think it had to do with his hair last night. He needs to put the hair back down, I think. When his hair is down, he plays better. And there are stats to prove that, by the way.
His hair.
All right, buddy. I just wanted to get your opinion on the game, okay?
Okay, love you. Bye.
All right, love you. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thanks, Ashton.
You're welcome, Anthony.
Well, guys, I do want to thank you for listening. This was a big time win, and we got 11-2, so we got 5 games to go. It's going to be a battle to see who comes out on top on the ACC. Hopefully, that game against Duke on March 9th will determine the ACC regular season champion. That makes the rivalry all the more intense. That game will be in Chapel Hill. It will be Luke May and Cam Johnson and Kenny Williams senior night, and hopefully we have something to play for. Want to encourage you guys to subscribe to this podcast through Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, and now iHeartRadio. Check out the blog. I'll have a full breakdown of this game up later today, and the Florida State stuff will be out as early tomorrow, if not Saturday. And also check out Anthony's Heel Tough blog and podcast covering Carolina football. They got a big, we got Junior Day coming up this Saturday, isn't that right?
We do. We're going to have some major prospects on campus for the 2020 class, which includes Anto Sampa out of Woodbridge High School up in Virginia. He's actually a 5-star, and then we'll have a good amount of 4-star prospects on campus as well, a lot of the guys in state. So, yeah, huge weekend for Carolina football.
Yeah, and I do want to note that the spring game is roughly 6 weeks away. It's Saturday, April the 13th, I think is the correct date, at 5 o'clock. So I think we're planning on making a trip up there to check out the revamped spring game now that Mac Brown's back in Chapel Hill. It's supposed to be a pretty fun event. So if you can, try to make it out there to Keenan in April. But right now we're going to keep on trucking through basketball season as Carolina is transforming into a team that's going to contend to win the ACC and probably compete to win a national championship. And so we'll keep you right here the rest of the way. I want to thank you guys for listening, and go Tar Heels.